It is race morning here, Sunday, November the 10th. Currently 5:41 a.m. Been out for about an hour. Woke up at 4:45 a.m. Had the usual bagel and a graham cracker just to make sure all the carb levels were up. It's time to race here in about 2 hours and 20 minutes. Just hanging out in the hotel room at the moment. Looked at the weather app. It is pretty cold out there right now, which for racing is a good thing, but for waiting around to race, it's not always the most comfortable thing. So my strategy is to essentially stay in here or stay in my car for as long as possible until the race actually begins. There's a small spot to hang out right around where the start line is at. This is a point-to-point course though, so unless you are gear checking or bag checking, and I've never done that, I'm sure it works perfectly, but I never want to add any additional thing to worry about, like making sure my winter jacket reaches the finish line. I'm essentially going to be hanging out in 35-degree weather or so in a singlet and half tights. I just want to stay as warm for as long as possible, so I'm not shivering away all of my race day energy. About to go race on the streets of Allentown all the way over to Easton. This is the D&L marathon that I ran last year, so hopefully we have a bit of a day here. Try not to put too many expectations on myself for this. Sort of the same goals that have been the same goals all year. And ultimately, though, I want to have as fun of a race as possible because this will likely be the last time that I give an all-out effort for this year. So maybe we race again, maybe it's just for fun. Really just want to have a good time putting out a good effort today. Right, we are over in the parking garage. I am bibbed up. I am in singlet, full racing kit, all that good stuff. It is still pretty cold out, about 50 minutes away from the start right now. So I think I'm going to head over just to try my luck at getting a chance at the bathrooms, which last year were pretty limited at this race. And I don't think they added any porta potties. So I'm gonna see if I can get in there at all before this starts. Otherwise, I don't think there will be much race footage because I will not be recording anything. And my fiance always gets pretty, I wouldn't say anxious, but she takes the bottle handoff pretty seriously.
Good pace, Connor!
Nice. Good job! Was that perfect? That was great.
And she did not stay here with me. She's meeting me here today. So I think she'll be all business today, probably not recording too much. We'll only see her at the halfway point, hopefully, as long as she remembers, and at the finish line. So yeah, we'll catch up afterwards.
This today.
This is what it's all about. The only reason to run marathons. I apologize. I was not able to get any race day footage. Not all of us have brothers on e-bikes that we can assemble out on the course to document us. So my fiance was at the finish line. So if you need race footage, here is the only recording of this race that I got.
Yay, Connor!
So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Man, what a race. Cannot emphasize enough how much fun I had in the midst of the suffering yesterday. And it was all well worth it to come away with a PB right here in the last several weeks of the year of 2024. I was not necessarily scared or anything that I wasn't going to take a step forward at all at the marathon distance, the distance I sort of hold closest to my heart and enjoy running the most. But definitely when I consider, how I was feeling coming off of last year's fall marathon, starting the year of 2024 with some solid marathon training, my mindset at that point a year, 10 months ago, was that the leap I would take from last fall to this fall was going to be great. PB'd by 13 minutes during last year's fall marathon. I didn't forecast another 13-minute PB, but I certainly thought that progress would continue. But like I've said in many of these videos over the last couple of months, life gets in the way. Everything has to be optimal. All of your ducks sort of have to be in a row for you to realize like really steady progress in something like running, which is very much so affected by all things in life. And I think that, speaking from my own perspective, I've sort of like taken the idea of getting a new personal best, just being able to run in general, for granted. And that is certainly something I will try to continue to remind myself not to do going forward in the future, because long story short, I had a 13-minute PB in the marathon last year at this same race, and I felt absolutely amazing. I was super grateful. And this year I felt just as fulfilled by like a 40 second personal best. Obviously, the differences in progress there are immense, but the feelings are the same. Like, I feel just as grateful and fulfilled by that time as I did last year. And it goes to show you that, chasing sub whatever and whatever specific, numeric goal you have set for yourself isn't always as important as just like going out, having a good time. At the very least, for me, just making some sense of progress. So in terms of mindset going forward, I think it's great to set goals. I think it's great for a ton of people to set that sub 3 hour goal, the sub 250, and so on and so forth. But I find that I am more fulfilled just by running good races, having fun doing so, and making like some semblance of progress along the way. So I think in terms of like a mindset change going forward, that's sort of where I'm at with things, because again, 252.37 compared to what I ran last year felt just as good as, 253.12 after running a 306. This was a race that I did not really second guess hopping into when I decided I wanted to double at the marathon, because like I've said, I ran this race last year. I got to be there for the inaugural marathon race in Allentown. This is the D&L marathon. Great little medal shot here. It is probably one of the most slept on races on the eastern half of Pennsylvania. So if you need a race come fall time that is affordable and fun and very well supported with a ton of volunteers and just like a great setup and a great course in general, this is a race that I would wholeheartedly recommend to people. And that is a huge reason why I, again, without a second thought, jumped into it this November. And the lead up, as I've documented, was pretty standard, at least in the couple weeks that I had to sort of regroup, train a little bit, and then taper again. And I, going into it, like I said in a couple of the past videos, had similar goals that I had for Chicago, but ultimately I just wanted to end the year with a really fun race that fulfilled me. And, whatever time that ended up, I was going to sort of be satisfied with it, as long as I was proud of the effort that I put out there and sort of ran a complete race, because it's much more fun to run most of the miles beyond mile 20 at what you intend to be running the whole thing at, as opposed to just like breaking down completely and dragging yourself to the finish line. And I definitely like teetered that line here and there, not nearly to the extent that I did at Chicago, where just everything went wrong. But there were times of doubt there towards the end where it was extremely evident that my legs were fatigued and tired, and that I was running my second marathon in a matter of 4 weeks. Really, I have not only the other people on the course, the two guys who finished just ahead of me, Luke and Avery, they really dragged me along towards the end of this race, and I cannot be more grateful for them, but also just, being proud that I was able to continue to go with them and sort of dig deep, because that has been a problem that I have towards the end of these marathons, when things feel like they're going really wrong, whether that's a GI issue, whether that's a cramp, whether it's just fatigue and exhaustion. I wouldn't say I necessarily like throw in the towel entirely, but I would say like my first 3 marathons especially, I kind of did. I was more than happy to just slow down, stop the suffering, listen to my body, and sort of coast into the finish line. I would say this is the deepest I've ever dug in a marathon, probably in a race in general, to really like scratch and claw my way back and fight everything in my body and in my mind that was telling me to slow down and to stop and just like persevere. And yeah, I'm extremely proud of that. And again, could not be more grateful for Luke, Avery, and Matt, who I shared quite a few miles with throughout this race. Ran this race in 2023 pretty much completely alone the whole entire way. It was a very quiet, very lonely race. I think one of the most underrated aspects of running marathons is running it with other people and sharing those miles with people who are chasing after similar goals, who are similarly motivated and can really like pick you up when you are down, and if you are able, pick them up when they are down. And being able to sort of pack up early was probably my favorite thing about this whole entire race. We were sort of clipping off some sub 6:30 miles early on, and it seemed like a great group to be sharing the roads with. And they told me that they were kind of looking for that Boston qualifier mark for our age group. They're a little bit younger than me, but they were shooting for some solid goals, and I thought it would be more fun and more fulfilling to run with some others than to essentially run alone the whole time and really push and suffer. Even though I'm willing to do that, and I ended up doing that in the end, it's a fun race experience to run with a pack. So settled in with them, ended up breaking away and picking up a little bit towards like a little beyond 10K, and it was me and another guy who were just sort of clipping off like sub 250 pace. And I think I went through the half. They don't have an exact half split or like a chip time mat at the halfway point. They have them at pretty odd points because there's also like a marathon relay event that happens with this race. Went through 7.2 miles in like 46 low, which is pretty much like 624, 625 pace. And I ended up going through half in like 124 high. So I was a little bit slower. I was closer to like 124 flat or 124 low in Chicago. So I definitely let off the gas a little bit compared to that effort. Felt extremely manageable. The effort felt considerably lower relative to pace during this race than it did in Chicago. And I think still trying to figure out what went wrong in Chicago, because the fitness was certainly there. Things still felt smooth in Chicago and things still felt good, but I think it was probably like an anxiety thing, just with experiencing like a bigger race on a bigger stage with more people, more crowds, more everything, traveling for a race via like having to fly somewhere. Experiencing that all for the first time probably had some like subconscious anxiety brewing within me, and that's really all I can chalk it up to, because preparation, the carb load, other than doing like a 2-day versus a 3-day carb load, but all the food, the pre-race meal, the gels, the fueling, everything was pretty much the same this time around as it was in Chicago, and the results were very different. So beyond that though, going through in 124 high felt so good. I felt like we were just out for like a steady run. It barely felt like marathon pace. And I was super confident through halfway that we were in a pretty good spot and that sub 250 was definitely possible. It was going to be pretty thin margins though, because I think going through half around that sort of projected me at like 249.30-ish or 40-ish. So I didn't have a ton of seconds to be working with, and really would have to either completely even split or negative split by a little to secure that sort of like a goal that I've had for a while. It wasn't really at the front of my mind. I certainly recognized the split halfway through, but I don't think sub 250 was really pushing me at any point. What was pushing me was just like having a really great race experience with some other people and just like clipping off mile after mile with some good company. And things continued to feel pretty good from there. This isn't, I would say it's a pretty flat course. I think Strava usually puts it somewhere between like 250 and 300 feet of elevation gain, which for a marathon is pretty flat, pretty fast. I think it's technically net downhill, so you have that on your side. But the thing with this race is a portion of it is on roads, like a conventional road marathon. But I would say the majority of it is on this canal path, this trail, which at times is very easily navigatable. You know, it's packed dirt, crushed gravel, which is a familiar training surface for me. I run on that type of surface quite a bit. Other parts of it can feel rockier than others, and it definitely works your stabilizer muscles in your legs a sneaky amount, because there are some like bigger stones, bigger rocks, some uneven surfaces to navigate, some twists and turns here and there. So it feels flat and fast as you are moving forward, but meanwhile, I would say your like lower leg muscles are definitely being worked a little bit harder than they would if you were just running like a conventional road marathon. So that's something to sort of consider when you sign up for a race like this, or just consider in recapping this race a little bit. So I steadily just lost like a second or two from mile 15 to mile 19. So I went from running like 6:28s, 6:29s to 6:32s, and then I was running 6:34s. And then by the time I get to mile 20, which you end up sort of veering off of the trail a little bit, and then you have a near sort of like hairpin turn that is straight up a hill then. And the hill really isn't that big at all, but when you're just running a pretty flat course for a while and suddenly there's a hill at mile 20, for me on this day it felt like pretty demoralizing, and I kind of like struggled up it, even though it isn't a very long hill. And mile 20 I dropped to a 6:39, and then 21 and 22 I was just sort of like hanging on and trying to push forward, and that's probably when I was like fighting the demons the most. I ran back-to-back 6:59s according to my watch, so I was really just hanging on, and that is when the sort of like mental negotiations started. And at that point, Matt, who I'd been sharing quite a few miles with, had sort of broken off ahead. He was trying to like sort of get me to come with him at points. He was asking me how I was doing a little bit before that, and it was clear that he was just feeling better at that point in the race. Through the first like 16, 17 miles, I was definitely feeling a little bit better than him. I was a little bit ahead of him. He was a few yards behind me, and that was sort of the way we went at it for most of the race. And then by that point, he had passed me around mile 20, 21, and he was a good bit ahead of me, but still within eyesight. But I just couldn't sort of go with him, which felt terrible for, because I really enjoyed sharing the miles with him. But then two other guys who I had sort of broken away from earlier in the race had ended up catching back up to me as my pace dropped towards that like 6:59, almost 7 flat range. And I heard them coming up behind me, and they sort of came right in line with me. If I would have kept running the pace I was, they would have just flown by me. But something in my mind, which I have never been able to muster that late in a race, 23 miles into it, just said, hang on. Just latch onto these guys, do everything you can to help them get to their goal, and maybe they'll help you to a time that you didn't think was possible 1 or 2 miles ago. So I said to them, my only goal from here is to help you guys. I'm gonna stay with you. Let's just push, and I just want to help you guys. Let's finish this thing. So with about 4 or so miles to go, I latched on to their 2-man pack. Pretty much from there to the end, we just pushed and pushed. And I would say that I was probably struggling the most out of us three at that point. Wasn't like a breathing thing, wasn't a heart thing. Like, fitness felt great, heart rate was low. I felt very capable when it came to that, but I would say physical and mental fatigue was definitely trying to get me to slow down. And we coasted in, we hit another hill. They pushed a little bit ahead of me around pretty much like the home stretch right before mile 26. And we were just kind of cruising through and ended up finishing in 2:52:37. They finished a little ahead of me. It was one of the most fun race experiences I have ever had. Everything else throughout the race went really, really well. Ended up with nutrition taking in 6 total gels, which was more than I was able to do with Chicago. And then I had 2 full 17-ounce soft flasks with 50 grams of carbs in each of those. So I think I ended up at about 240 grams of carbs, was kind of right at or right above that 80 grams per hour, which seemed to really work well for me. I wouldn't say I felt any GI distress at any point, but I definitely felt like full towards the later miles and didn't cramp up at all. The BPN gels seemed to work just as well as the Human Plus gels used to, and I found them much more palatable late into the race. I was able to keep taking on gels. Alpha Fly ones still felt like they were able to do what I needed them to do for the full marathon distance. I'm just grateful to be able to close out this year with a new personal best and with probably the most fun I've ever had running a marathon. I think last year during this race, there were 200 marathon finishers. This year there were 300, so percentage-wise, a pretty big increase. But, you know, it's a smaller local race that, despite that being compared to these massive world marathon majors, are just as fulfilling and are just as fun, just as meaningful. I had a great time doing it. And yeah, I couldn't be happier that this whole marathon doubling thing worked out, because I was certainly skeptical. I didn't feel quite as fresh as I did going into Chicago, going into this race. And I sort of obviously knew the reasons for that, it being my second marathon in 4 weeks. But I am really happy that I decided to do this, and it shows that it's possible to progress from one marathon to another despite not having a ton of time between them. So I'll probably consider doing the old marathon double again in future years. But, you know, I considered tripling. I was going to do a Philly here in 2 weeks. There was a bib that became available and was contacted by somebody. But yeah, I'm pretty tired now and my legs are sore. I think I'm going to save the marathon hunger for the spring, because, you know, I'm still hungry. I'm still wanting to continue to progress and get better and have more awesome race experiences like this one. So I'm excited to take a little bit of downtime and take a little bit of a break, but I'm also excited to eventually start to formulate a plan, get things together, and get back to it. But it's been awesome documenting this, not the sub 250 goal that we set out early in the year, but nonetheless just as fulfilling to get a personal best and end the year being able to say that every year I've gotten a little bit better at this crazy thing that we do called running. So thanks again for watching. If you have any other questions, I just kind of rambled here during this video about any specific elements of nutrition, gear, the race itself. If you're curious, you're a Pennsylvania resident or nearby in like New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, if you have any questions about the DNL Marathon, feel free to put those down below as well. Anything else, let me know. Thank you again for following along and watching. I hope to catch up soon. Peace.